Get in, nerds. We are playing Victoria 3. We're starting a new run as the British East India Company. It is the 1.8.2 patch. Uh, my attempts to record in 1.8.1 were not great, so here's hoping they've they've made the game a little bit more stable. So, for this is kind of episode 0 of the British East India Company run. By which I mean, what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of go over what's going on, and this is going to be my second attempt at recording this game, because, again, my first attempt was a little rough. So we're just going to be going over kind of what's going on with the British East India Company in 1836. Because, as you can see, there's a lot. And at the same time, we're going to be talking about what's new in the new update DLC patch system. So, first, let's talk about these journal entries. These are going to have a strong influence on how we're going to play the early game. Oh god. Oh, I don't like it when the music skips. Ugh. Alright. Hopefully, I've done all the things I usually do to fix the crashing problem, so hopefully that won't be an issue too much in this run. But we'll see, and hopefully 1.8.2 is a little bit more stable than 1.8.1 was. So, consolidate colonial rule. The frontier of our Indian territories has proven a consistent source of risk. We are surrounded by disorderly polities and arbitrary rulers which may threaten the integrity of our territory at any time. In order to ensure the security of our core holdings, those native sovereigns who still evade our rule must be brought to heel, and any hint of popular resistance crushed before it spirals out of control. As we expand our administration across India, we will have the opportunity to establish new princely states to aid our administration. Assuming direct rule over too much land will cause the liberty desire of our existing subjects to increase. So, this will complete if at least 80% of eligible states worldwide are currently owned by us or a subject of Britain or a subject of ours. Or Britain. Us or Britain or a subject of us or Britain. Highest Indian secession movement progress is less than 30% for 120 months. That hasn't happened because we haven't had 120 months go by yet. And then highest British Indian secession movement progress currently less than 50%. So, in my experience, secession movements are really fast, so I don't think it's going to have that much of an effect. And this is important. So, if we'll fail if at least one of these were not a subject of Great Britain or a colony. When we complete this, it triggers an event called a solid frontier. I assume that helps with various things, but more importantly, it helps with our other journal entry, the unstable Raj. Unrest is brewing in the 3 presidencies of the British East India Company. Troubled by harsh taxation regimes, increasing disrespect for local customs, and territorial expansion at the expense of native princes, Indian opposition to company rule has been mounting in recent years. Worse still, discord can be found within even the proud ranks of the native sepoy regiments, who resent any challenge to their traditional status and privileges. Sepoy Mutiny. If the stability of any presidency drops below high for 100 months, so that's just over 6 years, India will erupt into open rebellion. Currently, this has been true for 0 months. We'll complete the Consolidate Colonial Rule journal entry, which we just talked about a second ago, and we're going to go over which states that is in a minute. And then average standard of living in British East India Company is greater than or equal to 2. And then finally, less than or equal to 10% of pops in British East India Company are radicals. Will fail if the stability of any presidency is medium or less for 100 months. If failed, triggers the event mutiny. If time runs out, triggers the event mutiny. And we've got 24 years and 8 months to complete this. So, Consolidate Colonial Rule. What are the frontier states? They are Punjab, Punjab Hills, Sindh, Pashtunistan, Quetta, Kashmir, and Baluchistan in the west, and Mandalay, Sagyang, Shan states, and Pegu in the east. So, Mandalay is here. Sagaing, not Sagyang. Sagaing is here. The Shan states are here. This is Shan states. This is Shan, and this is part of the Shan states. And then Pegu is here, and we control a chunk of Pegu, which is over here. So we gotta get Burma. Shan is a puppet of Burma. So if we can get Burma, we can get control of all of those. And then the others are Punjab Hills, Pashtunistan, and Kashmir, which are here. This is the Punjab Hills. This is also part of the Punjab Hills. This is Punjab proper. Over here we have Kashmir, split between these two countries and this part of Chitral. These two countries being Ladakh and Jammu. And then over here is Pashtunistan, split between the rest of Chitral and a little chunk of Kabul. Then we've got Sindh, which is just Sindh here. Sindh is not currently independent. And then finally, we have Baluchistan and Quetta. Now I know Baluchistan is here, split between this chunk of Makran and Baluchistan and this chunk of Kandahar. And where is Quetta? Quetta is here, split between Kabul and Kandahar. So, we have a lot of conquest we need to do in a reasonably short period of time. We'll see how that goes. Because we need to consolidate colonial rule in order to defeat the unstable Raj. Next, I want to go over some other stuff that's changed in the new DLC. First, we've got our nice fancy society tab here. And what this is this is what exists instead of discrimination now. So instead of pops being discriminated and not discriminated, there's 5 levels, ranging from violent hostility, to cultural erasure, to open prejudice, to second-class citizenship, to full acceptance. And that's determined by your acceptance score, which is determined by your your cultural traits and their relationship with the cultural traits of the dominant culture, and your religion and its relationship with the religious traits of the dominant religion. Now, we are playing as British India, so that means our state religion is Protestant and our primary culture is English. Okay? So that means we're in kind of a really unusual place, that the majority of our country is not part of our primary culture. So that's going to be a whole situation here. So let's take a quick look at our political structure, and then we'll go over our laws. You can see some new items here, so we'll get into those. So first, we're a chartered company headed up by George Eden. He's reckless, and he aligns with the East India Company. That's the industrialists. This is the new content for the new DLC. We've got some special interest groups here, and I want to introduce them to you. First, we have the British East India Company. They're the industrialists here, but they're the English industrialists, and we'll get into the caste system in a minute. But the short version is this is the English industrialists. The capitalists who are from native to the area are going to be aligning with one of these other groups. East India Company's traits are colonialist. They like extraction economy, agrarianism, and banned industry, and they're okay with interventionism. They're against laissez-faire, command economy, cooperative ownership, and traditionalism. Trade policy, they dislike isolation and like free trade. Colonization, they like colonial exploitation, and they dislike everything else. Or they're neutral on everything else, at least. Labor rights, they dislike labor rights. Land reform, they like commercialized agriculture. They're neutral on tenant farmers, and they dislike everything else. This group represents a colonial interest reliant upon the continuous extraction of wealth from their territory, and favors the maintenance of this system over independent economic development. Next, we have enclavist. This group's interests lie in preserving its position as a colonial ruling class, secluding itself from its subjects, and preserving its power by means of an intricate and unaccountable bureaucratic system. In distro power, they like technocracy, oligarchy, and autocracy. They're okay with landed voting, but they're against all other forms of voting, as well as anarchy and single-party state. Governance principles, they're mostly neutral, but they dislike theocracies and council republics. Citizenship, they like national supremacy and racial segregation. They're neutral on ethno-state, but they oppose cultural exclusion and multiculturalism. Finally, stance on policing, the more violent the better. They like militarized best, they like dedicated okay, they're neutral on local, and they're against none. And then on bureaucracy, they like appointed bureaucrats and dislike it when the bureaucrats are hereditary or elected. Finally, they are Malthusian. This group subscribes to the economic theories established by Thomas Malthus, believing any effort to alleviate poverty to be made self-defeating due to consequent population growth. Stance on welfare, they're against it. Well, they like poor laws, but they're against proper welfare. Stance on health system, they like private a lot, they like none okay, and they're against public. Education system, they like private schools, they don't care about anything else. Stance on migration, they're against migration controls of all kinds. Stance on taxation, they like per capita and land-based. They're against graduated. And then caste hegemony, which is the new set of laws that we're going to take a look at in a minute. They are for caste system enforced. They like caste system codified, but not as much as enforced. They're neutral if it's not enforced, and if there's affirmative action going on, they're against that. So, this makes them pretty different from your garden variety industrialists for a lot of reasons, which we'll see. Next, we have the Presidency Armies. They're headed up by Sir Henry Fane. This is a standard armed forces thing. Oh, sorry. Let me take a look through the East India Company's abilities. Their negative ability, for when they're mad, is Wounded Honor. We are the enlightened few in a land that resists any enlightenment. Our methods are superior. Any disorder is a betrayal, and betrayal must be met with the harshest sanction. Minus 10% authority, 15% mortality per turmoil. So that's a really, really extreme ability that is going to cause real problems if we get these guys mad. So bear that in mind. Next, their mildly happy ability is Stamped and Signed, which is 10% bureaucracy. Stamps and ledgers are the methods we use to create order out of chaos. The governance of India requires an ocean of paper, and it is our task to ensure it circulates flawlessly. And then finally, their very happy ability is Responsible Governance. Minus 10% enactment time and plus 5% qualifications. Our mission is to extend justice and civilization to all men, and of course, to perpetuate the rule which permits this forevermore. So, that's the British East India Company. They're the constitutive faction interest group of our government. Now let's take a look at the others. Over in Marginalized, we got the trade unions. They're acting normal. It's early in the game, so that's not shocking. Our special ones here are the Zamindars, which is what we have instead of the landowners, the Bajadaks, which is what we have instead of the petit bourgeois, the Riots, which is what we have instead of the rural folk, the civil servants, which is what we have instead of the intelligentsia, and the Hindu priesthood, which is what we have instead of the devout. And all of these have some interesting things going on with them. So, let's start with the Zamindars. This is going to represent the native landowning class. As you can see, they're quite powerful. Their traits are the normal set of landowners' traits. Their abilities are a little different. Their unhappy ability is Summon No Zamindars instead of Noble Privilege. The rulers of our country have demonstrated that they have no interest in negotiation or flexibility. If this is so, then they should not miss the more subtle things we do to keep order. This reduces authority by 10% and increases the bureaucracy cost multiplier by 10%. Bureaucracy cost multiplier. Yeah, so I think that's just a flat 10% increase to all bureaucracy costs. So that's pretty rough if that's active. Their slightly happy ability is Famine Reserves. It is our duty to open our grain stores when a pressing need emerges. What better way is there to purchase goodwill from our tenants? Minus 20% agricultural employee mortality. So that's pretty solid. And then profitable estates is the third one. Didn't you know? What's good for the nobility is good for the nation. Prosperity trickles up. 30% increased aristocrats' investment pool contribution efficiency. So this is a stronger version of Noblesse Oblige, which is the baseline. Landowners' extremely happy ability. Next we have the Bajralaks. They're pretty different. They're still meritocratic like the petit bourgeois usually are, but they have a trait called modernizer. For trade policy, they like protectionism and are against mercantilism and isolationism. For children's rights, they like compulsory primary school and they dislike child labor. And then for economic system, they're for interventionism, neutral towards command economy and laissez-faire, and against cooperative ownership, agrarianism, extraction economy, and traditionalism. So as you can see, that's a pretty significant change from the way the petit bourgeois normally operate. Then at the end they have, let me read you the description here. Modernizer. This group is strongly invested in modernizing and centralizing the nation under rational lines. And then we have the sovereignist ideology. This group opposes oppressive measures imposed upon it by colonial authorities, preferring policies that serve the ends of national self-governance. Policing, they like local police force, and they're against dedicated and military. For migration, they're against no migration controls, and they prefer migration controls or closed borders slightly less. For free speech, this is the opposite of the way the petit bourgeois normally are, if I recall correctly. They're against outlawed dissent and censorship, and they're for right of assembly and protected speech. Then under citizenship, they endorse multiculturalism, and they're against racial segregation, national supremacy, and ethnostate. And again, this makes sense because this group represents the native petit bourgeois, whereas the East India Company represents the colonial overlords. Next we have, the abilities of the Bhadralaks are, their unhappy ability is Swadesh. We are as industrious as any other people, yet we are denied credit and forced into servitude by foreign businesses. If our rulers seek to exclude us from the economy, we shall do the same for them. What this does is it reduces investment pool contribution efficiency for both capitalists and shopkeepers. So I think this is the group that native capitalists are going to sort themselves into. Their happy ability is lines of credit. Were it not for credit provided by our own adept financiers, the company could never have conquered India. If we are given a solid business case, we are entirely willing to continue this relationship. So this is reduced loan interest rate. This is similar to savings bonds, which you get at high happiness normally for the petit bourgeois. Then finally, the highest one is cooperative agencies. Our rulers possess abundant capital, but have little knowledge of our country. By pooling their resources and our expertise, we may enrich our homeland far more than they ever could alone. 10% manufacturing industries throughput. So that's really interesting. That's an ability normally held by the trade unions. Do they have the same? They do. Interesting. So you can get a lot of manufacturing efficiency out of the Bhadralaks and the trade unions playing as the British East India Company, which is neat. Theoretically. We have the Riots next. They're the substitute rural folk. Their ideologies are the same as they normally are. Yeah, particularist, agrarian, isolationist. Their abilities are slightly different. Their unhappy ability is of the sovereign alone, 5% extra radicals from political movements, and minus 5% agricultural tax income. The burden placed upon us by those who own land is unbearable. These intermediaries must be reminded that we are the Riots of the sovereign alone. They have no rightful power over us. Their partially happy ability is imandari. Agriculture, ranch, and plantation throughput plus 10%. Our land is a wealthy one, and we work it with diligence. In good times, we can produce what we need and more. And then their extremely happy ability is bazaar bargains. That's bazaar, not bizarre. It is our bazaars which enrich our towns and draw visitors from miles around. If prosperity requires some organization, that's a price we're willing to pay. And that's 10% infrastructure. That's just the same. I think that one's exactly the same as farmers markets, which is the normal ability for the rural folk. In fact, I think Imandari might be the same as well, but I'm not sure. Next, we got the civil servants. They're exactly the same as the intelligentsia. They don't have anything special. Oh, wait, no, they do. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize. So they do have some different abilities. I think their ideology is slightly different as well. They're still liberal, they're still anti-clerical, and they're still anti-slavery. And those are all the same as in the baseline. But now we have constitutionalist, and I think this might be something that exists now in the new in 1.8.2 or in 1.8. I don't know if this is a change because I think the intelligentsia used to just be Republican. So I'm not sure if this is India specific or not, but let's take a quick look here. Stance on governance principles. They're against council republic. They are okay with corporate state and theocracy, but they like presidential republic, parliamentary republic, and monarchy. That's interesting. And then distro power. They actually like universal and census suffrage more than wealth voting now. They're Midland on landed voting, single party state, and technocracy, and they're against anarchy, oligarchy, and autocracy. So that's really interesting. For the special civil servants interest group for India, their unhappy ability is Swaraj. We find ourselves both alienated from and enslaved by the state. Our rulers deny us agency whilst requesting our unthinking service. Such a thing is doomed to fail, and, if needed, we will work to ensure that it does. Plus 10% political movement activism. Plus 5% radicalism increases for violent hostility, cultural erasure, and open prejudice acceptance levels. Their mildly happy ability is civil service, 5% extra bureaucracy and authority. People do have funny ideas about civil servants. We're here to help you formulate and implement your policies, after all. And then their very happy ability is westernization. Our present government serves as a representative of justice and progress, yet much of our country remains distant from it. We must seek to reduce the separation between state and people. Minus 5% radicalism for violent hostility, cultural erasure, and open prejudice status. So that's interesting. We can we'll definitely need to keep an eye on them. And then finally, at the bottom here, we have the Hindu priesthood as our devout faction. This is not the Church of England. This is the Hindu priesthood. So they have the normal pious and patriarchal belief systems. They also have Hindu moralist, which is because they're in the minority. I think this is because they're in the minority that this is structured like this. So their preferred church and state law is separation, because the church and state law, because the state religion of the Raj is Protestantism, and they're not Protestants. In terms of government principles, they like monarchy and dislike council republican theocracy. In terms of bureaucracy, they're for hereditary and against elected. In terms of caste hegemony, they like the caste system being enforced more. Their abilities are for their unhappy abilities, pious fictions, same as always. And their slightly happy ability is divine right, that's the same as always. Their very happy ability is asceticism, and I think that's true of a lot of devout interest groups all over Asia, at least a certain number of them. Anyway, it's minus 15% radicals from political movements, and that's pretty good. To abstain from the pleasures of the world is the right path. Do not let yourself be too perturbed by material changes. These two shall pass. And then they're headed up, they and their Riots both are headed up by a minoritarian traditionalist, which is the same. It's that church and state thing being reversed is what this is about, and that'll change if they become the majority. They're also against women's rights, and they like the caste system. So, speaking of the caste system, let's take a look at that. We've got our society tab here instead of the culture tab, so let's look at classes. This is the British Indian caste system, and it separates the interest groups slightly differently. This applies to all Hindu pops with the South Asian heritage trait in the country. So, lower stratum is pretty similar. The Shudras and the Dalit comprise the lower strata. The Dalit are just slaves. The Shudras are laborers, machinists, peasants, and servicemen. The middle strata is the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, and the upper strata are the Brahmins. Now, here's what's really different here. You'll notice the middle strata contains farmers, the way it normally does, and shopkeepers and the Vaisyas. Clerks are there as well. I thought clerks are normally lower. I think clerks are normally lower stratum, but now they're middle stratum. But the big difference is in the Kshatriyas, because Kshatriyas contains engineers and officers, which are normally middle stratum, but it also contains capitalists and aristocrats. So this means Hindu capitalists and aristocrats are going to be middle stratum rather than upper stratum, and that's why instead of aligning with the East India Company, those groups are going to align with the Zamindars and the Bhadralaks. And that's kind of how that's structured. Then in the upper stratum, for Hindu pops, we have academics, bureaucrats, and clergymen. So that's also really different, because that means that our most powerful class is going to be an academic class, which is really, really interesting. So let's take a quick look at let's take a look at our citizenship laws and our church and state laws, and that'll kind of show us what we're doing with cultural acceptance and whatnot. So, we've got cultural exclusion. For each culture, that means the following. You get 20 acceptance as baseline. So that puts you... So for cultural exclusion, every culture is going to be above... no one's going to be under open hostility because you get plus 20 acceptance baseline. You're going to get 40 acceptance if you share a cultural trait with the dominant culture, 60 if you share a heritage trait, and 80 if you share both. So if you have... if, for example, you have Scottish pops in India, they're going to get 20% baseline acceptance, plus 80 from heritage and cultural traits. That's going to put them in at 100%, I think is how that's going to work. Let me quickly try and verify that. Full acceptance. Can I see... Protestant. Can I see how acceptance is being calculated? Acceptance 100 from being primary culture. Alright, that doesn't help me. Scottish, here we go. Okay, so 80. Okay, so you only get your baseline, so it's a substitution thing. You get 80 from sharing heritage and cultural trait. So, but 80 does put you into full acceptance. And cultural erasure is at 20. Okay, alright, I get this. Alright, so the way it's going to work is, yeah, you're going to be in... if you don't share anything with the primary culture, you're going to be in cultural erasure. If you share just the cultural trait, you're going to be in open prejudice. If you share just the heritage trait, you're going to be in... Oh, what's the next level here? Second-class citizenship, and then if you share both, you're going to be in full acceptance. Alright, interesting. So that's how cultural exclusion works. And then there's going to be stuff from laws as well. So as we go over to these other ones, you can see they get, under racial segregation, you get less acceptance from all of those things. Under national supremacy, it's even less. There's no baseline acceptance under national supremacy. So that puts those cultures at lower down. So even under heritage and cultural traits both together, you'll be a second-class citizen under cultural supremacy, under national supremacy. And then for ethno-state, there's just 20 from heritage trait and 40 from heritage and cultural, which means if you share a language in an ethno-state, that means you're under cultural erasure. If you share a language and a heritage, if you share a heritage trait, you're under cultural erasure, but not a language, you're under cultural erasure. And then if you got a heritage and cultural trait, you're in open prejudice. So, ethno-state's pretty rough that way. Alright, so, and that determines where you fall on this here scale of acceptance. And very briefly, what this does is full acceptance pops get a little bit of extra wages. Second-class citizens are basically the same as full acceptance pops, but they both got voting rights, but second-class citizens can assimilate, full acceptance citizens cannot because they're the primary citizens, basically. Open prejudice is allowed to assimilate, and they get increased assimilation and reduced radicalism. They also have reduced political strength, reduced qualifications, and reduced wages, and pretty much those effects just go up as you go down. In fact, cultural erasure reduces your voting contribution to political strength for votes from these groups, and then open hostility is even more so. Open hostility, you can't vote if you're under open hostility, or violent hostility, rather. So, that's a brief go-around of what's going on in society, and then finally we'll talk about the caste system. So, the caste system basically is going to... we haven't looked at separation of church and state. So, this is just what kind of acceptance you get from sharing religious traits with the dominant culture. So under total separation, you get 15 acceptance from state religion, and 15 from sharing religious traits or not sharing religious traits. Under freedom of conscience, you get 20 for the state religion, 15 for sharing religious traits, none for baseline. And then for state religion, you get a baseline of minus 25, and then you get 25 for acceptance of the state religion only. So, no modifications for sharing traits at all. Plus, higher wages for state religion pops, which is interesting. Slightly higher under freedom of conscience as well. So that's the way religion factors into acceptance. Now, finally, we got the caste system and caste hegemony laws. Caste system enforced is where we're currently at. This puts 80 minimum acceptance for Brahmin's social class. And what that means is that our academics, as long as they're Hindu, our academics, our clerics, and our oh my gosh, what's the other group? I'm kicking myself. Academics, clerics, and bureaucrats are all going to be accepted as full citizens, which is interesting. Then there's reduced cultural acceptance for other social classes. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think we'll find out as we go. Caste system codified strengthens the zamindars and provides reduced bureaucracy population cost multiplier. It adds minimum acceptance for Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, but it also adds maximum acceptance for all the other classes. It also reduces qualification growth. I'm not quite sure how that works, and what the difference between qualification growth for the social class and qualification growth within the social class means. I think for the means moving into from another class, and then within means staying within that class, but I'm not sure. Finally, caste system enforced provides even more stringent qualification reductions. It does basically the same for the other stuff, while also strengthening the zamindars and providing additional bureaucracy population cost multiplier. So, that's a lot to deal with. Let's take a quick look at, let me see, that's the caste system, that's acceptance. I think those are the main things that are different here. The other things that are different are political movements, which we have quite a few. We'll kind of see how those play as the game goes on. But for now, we're not going to necessarily worry about it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good introduction to what India has going on. And when we get started, we'll make our starting decisions. We'll get up to our starting foreign policy, and we will get into the game. But for now, I've had fun. I hope you all have had fun, and I will see you on the other side.